Today we will cover the origins of the Knights Templar order. The sources used can be found in the description below. In this video you will learn everything you need to know about the history of the Knights Templars' rise to prominence, and how they came to be one of the most powerful and revered military organizations in Europe. So who are the Knights Templars? The origins of the Knights Templar order lies in the aftermath of the First Crusade. In year 1095, the First Crusade was called by Pope Urban II, which ended when the Crusader armies captured the city of Jerusalem in 1099. The First Crusade led to the creation of several new Christian states on the eastern coast of the Mediterranean, such as the County of Tripoli, the Principality of Antioch, and the Kingdom of Jerusalem. Several of these new states covered large areas of land that the kings had a hard time to control, making traveling pilgrims and people outside the cities easy prey for bandits and raiding parties from nearby Islamic states. In this context, a new order of knights was formed. The Archbishop Willem of Tyre tells of a group of knights known as the Poor Knights of Christ, led by two men called Hugh of Payens and Gottfried of Saint Omer. They were godly and pious, and in year 1118 they took vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience to the Patriarch of Jerusalem. The King of Jerusalem, Baldwin II, looked favorably upon this group of knights, and he gave them the southern part of his palace to use as their base of operations. This part of the palace was believed to be situated at the same place as the Temple of Solomon in ancient Israel, and it's from there that the order's most well-known name, Knights Templars, comes from. In addition to the southern part of the palace, the king also donated economical resources to the order for food and clothing. Once established, the new order of knights were given the task by the Patriarch of Jerusalem, as well as by other bishops, to defend the roads of the Kingdom of Jerusalem against bandits and raiders, and to protect Christian pilgrims in the Holy Land. Despite the support from the King of Jerusalem, the Knights Templars had initially little success as an organization. In its first 5 years, the order had only managed to recruit 9 new members and were short of money. The primary sources tells us that they in their early years needed to be dressed in clothing that pious men in Jerusalem had given them, and there's evidence that the members of the order experienced a loss of moral and faith in the big task that they had taken upon themselves. However, despite this, the Knights Templars pushed on, and in year 1127, the order's founder Hugh of Payens undertook a tour of Europe to get donations from the European nobles, and to recruit new soldiers into the ranks of the Knights Templars. The tour was a huge success, reaching its high point at a church meeting in Troyes in 1129, where Hugh was able to spread the news of the Knights Templar order and their mission to many secular and ecclesiastical leaders in Europe, many whom looked favorably on the young order of knights. They received many donations in forms of land and property, which mainly were located in England, France, and on the Iberian Peninsula. This laid the foundation of a structure of provinces that during the order's first 20 years started to transform into a hierarchy of administrators that gave financial support to the Knights Templars' war activities in the Holy Land and other places. In 1139, Pope Innocent II issued a bull that granted the order special privileges, which among other things allowed the Knights Templars to build their own oratories, and being exempt from episcopal jurisdiction, which meant that they were being subject to the Pope alone. To fully understand why the orders of the Knights Templars were created, we need to look at the bigger political, social, and religious context of Europe during the High Middle Ages. In the middle of the 11th century, the medieval church has started a campaign to root out all of the corruption that had plagued the church during the early Middle Ages, including simony, priestly unchastity, and other ills. This created an atmosphere in medieval Europe where many people felt called to change their lives and to free themselves from what was considered to be harmful material influence. One such evil that people tried to oppose was the violence that occurred between the feudal lords of medieval Europe. In the 10th century, this had taken the form of the Peace of God movement, in which the medieval church and much of the peasantry banded together to end the violence that was caused by the nobility. The movement had a limited effect, which made some people in the ecclesiastical elite to ponder on other ways that the violence of the feudal lords could be kept in check. More and more people in the ecclesiastical elite came to believe that the church goal of abolishing violence completely was unrealistic, and many churchmen started to argue that the nobility's violence should not be abolished, but instead channeled for a greater cause. With the call of the First Crusade, this took the form of the idea of a holy war, and that people could receive salvation by taking up arms against the enemies of Christianity. The medieval view on the religious and the secular was very dualistic, where the lords and kings were responsible for worldly concerns, while the church were responsible for spiritual concerns. The creation of the Knights Templars were therefore viewed by several people within Christendom as something bizarre, since it blended the lines between the worldly and spiritual spheres. And throughout the history of the Knights Templars, the order always had critics among ecclesiastical circles, who were ardently against the idea of an order of monks using violence, and who considered the Knights Templars to be an abomination. However, despite the critics, the idea of military monastic orders had become well rooted within the minds of people during the High Middle Ages, and the Knights Templars were highly revered in medieval Christendom throughout most of the order's history. The Order of the Knights Templars were, as mentioned earlier, a blending of the worldly and spiritual spheres in medieval society. Being a Knights Templar was in many ways similar to being a monk, and the order was modeled after the Benedict rule, and it drawn a lot of inspiration from contemporary monk orders such as the Cistercians. The guiding principles of the Templar Order was written by one of the most prominent monks during the High Middle Ages, called Bernard of Clairvaux, and the rules of the order were very strict. A Knights Templar were not allowed to gamble, swear, or become drunk, and were required to live in community, sleeping in a dormitory, and eating meals together with his knight brothers. To become a Templar Knight, one had to swear an oath of poverty, chastity, and obedience. Similar to the monk orders, a Templar Knight also had to renounce any claims he had on land and property. The order was divided into 3 classes, known as Templar Knights, Templar Sergeants, and Chaplains. The Knights, or Knights Brothers as they were also called, mostly came from the medieval aristocracy and were trained in the arts of war. They assumed the leadership positions in the order and served at royal and papal courts, and they were also the only ones in the order allowed to wear the famous Templar uniform of the white surcoat marked with a red cross. The sergeants, or serving brothers as they were also called, generally came from the lower classes in the medieval society. They made up the majority of the members of the order, and in contrast to the Knight Brothers, they wore black habits and served as both warriors and servants. The chaplains essentially had the role of being the priest of the order, responsible for holding religious services, administrating the sacraments, and addressing the spiritual needs of the other members. As the Knights Templar Order grown in numbers and property, its purpose gradually expanded to encompass a broader defense of Christianity against the forces of Islam, and at their height, the Knights Templars had become an essential part in the defense of the Kingdom of Jerusalem, serving as the kingdom's elite forces. The Templars were not only active in the Kingdom of Jerusalem, but was early on also participating in the wars between the Christian and Islamic states on the Iberian Peninsula, where the kings of Castile and Aragon gave them many of the castles that were conquered in the sparsely populated areas of medieval Spain. In battle, the Knights Templar warriors were feared by their enemies, described as marching in silence and charging against the enemy, singing in chorus the Psalm of David. Being the first ones to attack, the last ones to return, and being forbidden to retreat unless ordered to do so. The Knights Templars were known for being fearless, and fighting to the last man if needed. In fact, they were so feared and despised among their Muslim opponents, that one account tells of Saladin, after having defeated the armies of Jerusalem at the Battle of Atene, offering 50 denarii to every man who could take one of the Knights Templars as prisoner, and upon having gathered around 100 Templar Knights, commanded that they all would have their throats cut out on the spot, rather than taking them as prisoners. For more information about the Knights Templar Order, I recommend you pick up the book The New Knighthood by the British scholar and leading expert of the Knights Templars, Malcolm Barber. And don't forget that if you like this video and want to see more videos like it, hit the like, share and subscribe buttons.